If someone had told me 40 years ago that at 67 I would wake up every morning feeling like I had been hit by a truck, I would have laughed in their face. But life has a way of throwing surprises at you, especially when you least expect them. My name is Clarice Hampshire, and for the past 32 years, I have worked as an urban planning specialist for the city of Dallas. Not the most glamorous profession, I agree, but it has given me the opportunity to leave my mark on this city. Several parks, the renovation of a historic neighborhood, and a bike path system that I am particularly proud of. My office on the 8th floor of a gray administrative building has long been my second home. Sometimes I feel like I've spent more time here than in my own four walls. Today started like any other morning. I struggled to get out of bed, fumbled for my glasses on the bedside table, and checked my blood sugar first thing. Type 2 diabetes has been my constant companion for the last 15 years. The numbers were higher than normal, but not critical. I took my insulin injection, a familiar movement that no longer evokes any emotion. In the bathroom, I was greeted by my reflection in the mirror. Gray hair pulled back into a messy bun, wrinkles that I had long since stopped counting, and tired green eyes inherited from my mother. I smiled at my reflection, an old habit I picked up from my father. Smile, Clarissa, even when you're sad, especially when you're sad, he used to say. Breakfast was meager, unsweetened oatmeal and tea. The house I had inherited from my parents always seemed too big for one person. A two-story house with 4 bedrooms and a spacious living room, it was built in the 1940s and retained the atmosphere of that time. Wooden floors that creaked in certain places, high ceilings, and large windows overlooking a quiet street lined with elm trees. After breakfast, I got ready for work. Beige pants, a white blouse, and an old blue jacket that I've been wearing for 10 years. My sister-in-law, Anora, once jokingly remarked that my wardrobe was stuck in time, just like my hairstyle. I kept quiet then, although I wanted to reply that not everyone needs to look like a fashion magazine cover to feel comfortable. The drive to work takes 20 minutes in my old Honda Accord, which I bought after my divorce. Thoughts of divorce always evoke a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Garrison and I lived together for 15 years before we realized that our marriage had become a coexistence of two strangers under one roof. I remember the day he told me he had met another woman and wanted a divorce. Edwin was 12 at the time. The boy cried as his father packed his things, while I stood in the kitchen, mechanically stirring the soup that no one would eat that evening. Garrison moved to Arizona with his new lover, a young, energetic woman who worked for his company. They didn't stay together long, as I later learned, but by then our divorce was final, and Garrison decided to stay in the West, visiting his son only rarely. At work, it was a typical day. A meeting about a new project to redevelop an old industrial area, several calls from dissatisfied residents, and mountains of paperwork demanding my attention. Carol, my colleague of 20 years, popped into my office with a cup of coffee. "You look tired, Clarice. Is everything okay?" I nodded. Although I had been feeling worse than usual for the past 2 weeks, constant thirst, weakness, and occasional dizziness. Classic symptoms of unstable blood sugar, but this time they were more intense. "It's just my age," I joked. "Have you made an appointment with Dr. Reynolds yet?" Carol persisted. "You promised you would last week." "I'll do it today," I lied, knowing that I would probably put off the doctor's visit again. After lunch, Edwin called me, my son. Those two words always stir up a storm of conflicting emotions in me. Love, pride, disappointment, resentment, all mixed together in a strange cocktail that I swallow every time I hear his voice. "Mom, Honor and I want to stop by tonight to show you some photos from our trip to Europe." His voice sounded tense, as if this visit was an unpleasant duty, and that was exactly what it was. After Edwin married Honor 5 years ago, our relationship became strained. Anora, a literature professor at a local college, always looked down on me as if I were some kind of museum piece from the last century. "Of course, dear," I replied. "I'll make dinner." "No, Mom," Edwin quickly objected. "We'll eat before they arrive." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Another small rejection, another way of showing that my concern was not wanted. They arrived in the evening, just as I had finished preparing dinner, roast chicken with vegetables despite my son's words. Old habits die hard. Anora entered first, tall, slender, with perfect hair and designer clothes. She glanced around my living room as she always did, with a barely perceptible grimace of disapproval. Clarice, those rugs must be as old as the house, she said instead of greeting me. We saw some just like them in an antique shop in Paris, only there they were behind glass like museum exhibits. Edwin smiled awkwardly, but didn't defend me. My son had changed since he got married. He had gone from being a sensitive, attentive boy to a man who seemed ashamed of his mother. Perhaps I had expected too much of him, sacrificed too much for his well-being. After the divorce, I turned down a promotion that would have required frequent travel, so I could be close to my son. I passed up several opportunities for a personal life, including an offer from Thomas, a kind widower who taught at Edwin's school, because my son reacted negatively to our relationship. I had always put his interests above my own, and now, looking at this man who was a stranger to me, I couldn't help but wonder if it had been worth it. "I've made dinner," I said, heading for the kitchen. "Mom, I told you not to," Edwin replied irritably. "We just got back from the restaurant." Anora threw a photo album on the table. "We brought you a souvenir from Paris," she said in the tone one usually uses with small children. It was a small notebook with the Eiffel Tower on the cover, probably bought in a hurry at the airport. "Thank you, that's very nice," I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. The next hour was filled with their stories about their trip, interrupted by Honora's condescending comments. "You've never been to Europe, have you, Clarissa?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. "It's a completely different world. The culture, the art, the fashion. It's all on a level that's hard to understand unless you've seen it with your own eyes." I nodded silently, remembering how I had turned down a trip to Paris with my friends 25 years ago because Edwin had to prepare for his exams and I didn't want to leave him alone. "Mom, you've lost weight," Edwin suddenly remarked, interrupting his wife's monologue about Parisian cafes. "And you look pale." "I'm just tired from work," I dismissed. "I have a lot of projects right now." "Don't you think it's time to retire?" Anora asked, looking at me with undisguised curiosity. "At your age, many people are already enjoying their well-deserved retirement." "I like my job," I replied firmly. "But it's so old-fashioned to cling to your job at your age," Anora continued. "Most of your colleagues must be old enough to be your children." "Actually, I'm the youngest in our department," I replied with a slight smile, enjoying the fleeting look of surprise on her face. Edwin cleared his throat awkwardly. "By the way, Mom, we wanted to discuss something important with you." Something in his tone made me wary. "Anora and I think you should consider moving into a retirement community," he said, avoiding my gaze. "You know, there's medical staff, lots of people your age, activities." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this house is too big for you on your own," Anora interjected. "And it needs constant maintenance. You can see that the porch needs repair and the garden looks neglected." "I'll hire a gardener," I countered. "It's not just the house, Mom," Edwin sighed. "We're worried about your health. You live alone, and if something happens—" "I'm fine," I snapped. "But your diabetes," Edwin began. "I've been managing my diabetes for 15 years, I interrupted, "and I plan to continue doing so." Anora rolled her eyes. "Clarice, you're just being stubborn. We're offering you a reasonable solution and you won't even discuss it." I looked at my son, trying to see the boy who used to draw me birthday cards and bring me flowers from the neighbor's garden. But sitting in front of me was a grown man who seemed more concerned with his wife's opinion than his mother's feelings. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, "but I'm not moving anywhere. This is my home and I'm staying here." Edwin and Anora exchanged glances, and I knew that this was not the end of the conversation, but only the beginning. After they left, I sat in the silence of the living room for a long time, looking at the photos on the mantelpiece. Edwin in his graduation suit, me with him on the beach when he was 10, a photo of my parents on their 50th wedding anniversary. Life had passed so quickly that I hadn't even noticed how I had gone from being a young single mother to an elderly woman whom her own son considered a burden. The next morning, I woke up with a severe headache and nausea. I checked my blood sugar and found it was dangerously high. My hand was shaking as I dialed the clinic. "Dr. Reynolds can see you today at 3 o'clock, the nurse said after a short pause. Judging by your symptoms, it's best not to delay your visit. I called work and took a sick day for the first time in many years. Carol sounded concerned. You finally decided to take care of yourself, she said. Do you want me to pick you up and take you to the doctor? No, I'll be fine, I replied, even though I was feeling worse. An unpleasant surprise awaited me in Dr. Reynolds' office. After examining me and running some tests, he took off his glasses and looked at me with a serious expression. Clarice, your blood sugar levels are significantly above normal. You are developing diabetic ketoacidosis, a serious complication that requires immediate hospitalization. But I can't go to the hospital, I protested. I have work, projects. If you don't go to the hospital now, the next time you come in, you could end up in intensive care, the doctor replied sternly. I've already called the hospital. They're waiting for you. So in one day, my normal life fell apart. As the paramedics helped me into the ambulance, I thought about how Edwin would use this situation as another argument for me to move into a nursing home. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. After all, stubbornness is a trait I inherited from both my parents. And it was this trait that helped me survive divorce, loneliness, and all the difficulties that life threw at me. Already in the hospital, lying under an IV, I decided that it was time to stop sacrificing myself for a son who had long since grown up and chosen his own path. It was time to start living for myself, even if it meant standing up to my own child. The hospital room greeted me with sterile cleanliness and the smell of disinfectant. Daylight streamed in through the large window, but even it seemed artificial, filtered through the blinds. A nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gray hair, helped me settle into the bed. My name is Bernice, she introduced herself as she hooked up the IV. I'll be taking care of you during the day shift. Dr. Coleman will come see you in about an hour after he gets all your test results. I nodded, feeling weak all over. Diabetic ketoacidosis was what Dr. Reynolds had called my condition. It sounded scary, although I knew it was a serious complication of diabetes that occurs when the body starts breaking down fat too quickly, and the liver converts the fat into ketones, which causes the blood to become acidic. It's a dangerous condition, especially at my age. Do you need anything? Bernice asked, finishing with the fourth. My phone, I replied. I need to call work. Bernice took my cell phone out of the bag that had been brought with me. Just a quick call, she warned. You need to rest. I called Carol, briefly explained the situation, and asked her to reschedule my meetings for the following week. My colleague sounded concerned, but I assured her that everything would be fine. Do you need anything from home? She asked. I can stop by and bring it to you. Thanks, but I'll call my son, I replied, although the thought made me feel conflicted. After talking to Carol, I dialed Edwin's number. He didn't answer until after the fifth ring. Mom? I have a meeting in 5 minutes, he said instead of saying hello. I'm at the hospital, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Diabetic crisis. The doctors say I'll have to stay here for a few days. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him sigh heavily. Which hospital? Memorial Hermann, I replied. Endocrinology, 6th floor. Anora and I will come by tonight, he said after a pause. Do you need anything from home? I dictated a short list of items, and Edwin quickly said goodbye, citing the start of a meeting. I put the phone down on the bed, feeling a familiar pang of sadness. Once upon a time, my little boy would cry if I was late coming home from work, and he would fall asleep only when he was holding my hand. Now, the news of my hospitalization elicited no more emotion from him than the weather forecast. Dr. Coleman was a tall man with premature gray hair and an attentive gaze. He studied my chart carefully, then sat down on a chair next to the bed. Mrs. Hampshire, you have severe diabetic ketoacidosis caused by prolonged decompensation of diabetes, he began. Your blood glucose level is critically high. There are signs of kidney damage, and we need to start intensive treatment immediately. How long will I have to stay here? I asked, thinking about the unfinished projects at work. At least a week, Dr. Coleman replied. Then we'll decide based on your progress. But I want to warn you that after you're discharged, you'll need more careful monitoring of your health and possibly help with daily activities. The last sentence made me tense. That was exactly what I was afraid of. that my illness would become an excuse for Edwin and Anora to insist on a nursing home. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, I said firmly, and I'll be able to take care of myself after I'm discharged, too. Dr. Coleman looked at me with a slight smile. You seem like a very independent woman, Mrs. Hampshire, but sometimes even the strongest of us need help. We'll talk about it later when you're feeling better. For now, rest and let us take care of you. The day dragged on. Nurses came to check on me, change my IV, and take tests. I looked out the window at the hospital grounds where patients were walking with their relatives and felt strangely cut off from the world. Over the years, I had become so accustomed to being busy, always on the go, always with a plan for the day, that forced inactivity felt almost physically painful. Edwin and Anora arrived around 7 in the evening. My son looked tense, and his wife looked slightly irritated, as if the hospital visit had disrupted their plans for the evening. We brought your things, Edwin said, placing a bag on a chair. How are you feeling? Anora asked, but there was no genuine interest in her voice. Better, I replied. The doctors say I'll have to stay here for a week. A week? Edwin asked, exchanging a quick glance with Anora. But who will look after the house? The house will be fine without me for a week, I said, feeling irritated. It's not the first time. That's not what I mean, Edwin frowned. What will happen when you're discharged? Will you be able to take care of yourself? Of course I can, I replied, trying to make my voice sound more confident than I felt. It's just a temporary setback. Dr. Coleman will adjust your medication and you'll be fine. Anora sat down on the edge of the bed, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping out a rhythm on her purse. Clarice, you have to be realistic. Your condition is serious, and you live alone in a huge house. Edwin and I have already discussed this, and now is the time to consider a specialized facility where you will be under the supervision of doctors. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. I'm not going to discuss this now, Anora. I just got out of the hospital and don't even know the exact diagnosis or prognosis yet. But now is the time to think about it, she insisted. While you're here, we could start looking for a good place. There's a wonderful facility called Golden Autumn not far from our house. It has everything you need. Medical staff, a swimming pool, hobby groups. I said I don't want to discuss this, I repeated, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. Edwin, noticing my state, put his hand on his wife's shoulder. Not now, Anora. Mom's right. We need to wait for the doctor's conclusion. Anora pursed her lips but didn't argue. The rest of their visit passed in tense silence, interrupted by occasional remarks about the weather and Edwin's work. None of them asked what the doctors had said about my condition, what medication I had been prescribed, or how I was feeling. Instead, they discussed their plans for the weekend and the new car Edwin was thinking of buying. When they finally left, I felt both relieved and deeply sad. How had my only son become such a stranger? At what point had I lost touch with the child I had raised with so much love? The night in the hospital was restless. The noise of the machines, the nurse's footsteps in the hallway, the moans of the patient in the next room, it all kept me awake. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about my life, about the decisions that had brought me to this point. After my divorce from Harrison, I devoted myself entirely to Edwin and my work. There were men who showed interest in me, but I always found reasons to keep them at a distance. Edwin needed me, I told myself. He had just gone through his parents' divorce and needed stability. But the truth was that I was afraid to open up again, to trust someone again, and possibly be rejected again. When Edwin went to college, I could have started a new life, but the habit of being alone had become too ingrained. I threw myself into my work, climbing the career ladder, and told myself I was happy. And maybe I was, a quiet, predictable kind of happiness, where every day was the same as the last. Then Edwin met Honor, and everything changed. She was ambitious, determined, and had a clear vision of what their life together should look like. And in that picture, there was no place for his mother, a simple municipal employee from an old-fashioned home. Gradually, Edwin began to distance himself. His visits became less frequent, and when he did come, he increasingly looked at me through Honora's eyes, with slight condescension and hidden impatience. In the morning, Nurse Bernice woke me up to check my blood sugar. Better, she nodded approvingly, looking at the readings. but still a little high. How are you feeling? My head hurts less, I replied. And I'm not nauseous. That's a good sign, Bernice smiled. Dr. Coleman will stop by after his rounds. In the meantime, I'll bring you breakfast. It's a special diabetic diet, so don't expect any culinary delights. Breakfast was indeed meager. Sugar-free oatmeal, a slice of whole grain bread, and herbal tea. I ate without appetite, looking out the window at the day dawning. The sun was rising over Dallas, painting the skyscrapers in golden hues. Dr. Coleman appeared around 10, tablet in hand, and a serious expression on his face. Good morning, Mrs. Hampshire. Your test results show improvement, but we still have a long way to go. The ketoacidosis has begun to correct itself, but your sugar levels are still too high, and there are signs of early diabetic nephropathy, kidney damage. How serious is it? I asked, feeling my stomach tighten with fear. Serious enough to require constant monitoring and strict control of your diet and medication, the doctor replied, but not so serious that you need to panic. With the right treatment, many patients with these numbers live for many years without serious complications. What about my independence? I asked bluntly. My son and his wife are already planning to send me to a nursing home, but I want to stay in my own home. Dr. Coleman looked at me thoughtfully. That depends on a lot of factors, Mrs. Hampshire. How quickly you recover, your ability to follow instructions and monitor your condition. If you have someone who could check on you regularly, at least in the beginning after you're discharged, that would be ideal. I have friends, I said, even though I knew that in recent years I had become increasingly distant from my social circle, immersing myself in work and solitude. All right, the doctor nodded. We'll come back to that conversation closer to your discharge. Right now, we need to focus on your treatment. The day dragged on. Carol called to see how I was feeling and offered to stop by after work, but I declined, feeling too exhausted for visitors. Edwin didn't call. I spent most of the day dozing or staring out the window, trying not to think about the future, which had suddenly become so uncertain. In the evening, when the hospital corridors had fallen silent and only the occasional footsteps of nurses broke the quiet, I heard familiar voices outside the door. Edwin and Anora had come again, but for some reason they were in no hurry to enter the room. I sat up in bed about to call them when I heard snatches of their conversation. It's the perfect moment, Anora said in a hushed but insistent voice. Grandma clearly can't cope on her own anymore. This crisis is proof that she needs constant care. But she'll resist, Edwin replied. You know how stubborn she is. That's exactly why we need to act now, while she's in the hospital, Anora continued. I've already arranged for a viewing of Golden Autumn over the weekend, and we could start getting the house ready for sale. I've always said it's in a great location, and with a little renovation it would be worth a lot more. Sell it? Edwin asked doubtfully. But it's my childhood home, which has become a burden for your mother, Anora interrupted him. Be realistic, Edwin. The house is too big for her. It needs constant care and repairs. By selling it, we could pay for several years in a good nursing home, and with the rest of the money, well, we've always talked about starting our own business. I felt my heart skip a beat. They were planning to sell my house, the house where I grew up, where I raised my son, a house full of memories of my parents and our family history. And not just sell it, but use the money for their own purposes, hiding behind a veil of concern for my well-being. I don't know, Anora. Edwin's voice sounded uncertain. Maybe we're rushing into this? On the contrary, we've waited too long, she insisted. Your mother is 67, she has serious health problems, and she lives alone in a huge house. It's irresponsible to let her take such a risk. Selling the house is simply the logical thing to do. She won't be able to look after it anyway, and sooner or later it will have to be done. Better now, while the real estate market is booming. There was a pause, and I imagined my son frowning as he pondered his wife's words. When he spoke again, his voice sounded more determined. You're right. We need to act now. I'll talk to her about the nursing home today, and on the weekend we'll go see Golden Autumn. I'll also contact a real estate agent to have the house appraised. That's good, Anora said with satisfaction. And don't forget to mention that it's all for her own good. Old people like to be taken care of. I leaned back against the pillows, feeling a wave of anger and despair rising inside me. They were talking about me as if I were a helpless child or an incompetent adult. They were planning to take control of my life, my home, my future, without my consent or involvement. And worst of all, they were justifying it by saying they were doing it for my own good, when in reality they were only thinking of their own interests. The door to the room opened and they entered with fake smiles on their faces. I pretended I had just woken up, not wanting them to know I had overheard their conversation. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Edwin asked, kissing me on the cheek. "A little better," I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. "We brought you some fruit," said Anora, placing a small basket on the bedside table. "Although I'm not sure if you can have it with your diabetes." "Thanks," I replied dryly. Edwin sat down on the edge of the bed, his face serious. "Mom, Honora and I want to talk to you about something important." "About the Golden Autumn nursing home?" I asked bluntly, watching his eyes widen in surprise. "How did you know?" "Hospital walls are thin," I replied. "And I'm not moving into a nursing home, Edwin. And I'm certainly not selling my house." Honora shot her husband an annoyed look, as if he were to blame for my finding out about their plans. "Clarice, be reasonable," she began in her condescending tone. "Your health? My health is my business," I interrupted. "And so is my house." "But Mom," Edwin interjected, "Dr. Coleman said you need constant care and supervision." "Did you talk to my doctor?" I asked indignantly. "We ran into him in the hallway," Edwin explained. "He said your condition is serious and requires constant monitoring." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I appreciate your concern, but I will make my own decisions about my life, and I'm not going anywhere." "But who will take care of you?" asked Honora. "Edwin and I work all day. We can't constantly check on you to make sure you're all right." "I'm not asking you to do that," I replied. "I've managed just fine on my own all these years, and I'll continue to do so." The conversation continued in the same vein for a while longer. They tried to convince me, and I refused to even consider their offer. Finally, Anora lost her patience. "All right, we'll talk about this when you're in a more reasonable mood," she said, getting up. "Come on, Edwin, we have to go." My son looked upset, but he obediently followed his wife. At the door, he turned around. "Mom, we just want what's best for you." "I know, dear," I replied softly. "But you have to understand that best for me is not the same as best for you." After they left, I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Thoughts swirled around in my head, giving me no peace. What if they were right? What if I really couldn't live on my own anymore? What if the next crisis was even worse, and there was no one around to call an ambulance? But then I remembered their conversation in the hallway, their plans to sell my house and use the money for their business. No, it wasn't about caring for me. It was about convenience for them and financial gain. I took my phone out of the nightstand and stared at it for a long time, thinking. There was one person who might be able to help me, a person with whom I had a complicated history, but who knew me better than anyone else. Garrison. We hadn't spoken in several years, not since Edwin married Honor. Garrison had flown in for the wedding. We had exchanged a few polite words at the reception, and he had flown back to Arizona the next day. But before that, for many years after the divorce, we had maintained a calm, respectful relationship. He called on Christmas and my birthday, and we sometimes exchanged emails. He knew about my diabetes and always asked about my health. And most importantly, he knew the history of our house, the house I had inherited from my parents, and which was part of a complex family trust my father had set up to protect the family property. A trust that Edwin seemed to have forgotten or never knew about. I dialed Harrison's number before I could change my mind. He answered on the third ring. "Clarice?" His voice sounded surprised but not unpleasant. "Is something wrong?" "Yes," I replied, suddenly feeling tears welling up in my throat. "I need your help, Garrison." "What happened?" His voice sounded genuinely concerned. "I'm in the hospital," I said. "Diabetic crisis, and Edwin and Anora are planning to sell my house and put me in a nursing home." "What?" Garrison exclaimed. "Without your consent? They can't do that." "They think they can," I said with a bitter smile. "They've already contacted a real estate agent and are looking at places in a nursing home." "What about the trust?" Garrison asked. "They can't sell the house without the consent of all the beneficiaries." "I'm not sure Edwin remembers the trust," I replied. He was only 15 when my father set it up, and I never discussed the legal details with him after that. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Garrison spoke in a determined tone. Listen, Clarice, I'll fly to Dallas. I had a business trip planned for next week anyway, but I can move it up a few days. I'm still listed as a beneficiary in the trust, right? Yes, I confirmed. My father insisted on it despite our divorce. He always respected you. Then I'll help you sort this out, Garrison said firmly. Edwin can't control your life and your property just because you're in the hospital. That's absurd. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. The third day in the hospital was a little easier than the previous ones. My blood sugar was gradually decreasing, and the weakness and dizziness were subsiding. Dr. Coleman was pleased with my progress, although he warned me not to get too excited. You're on the mend, Mrs. Hampshire, but diabetic ketoacidosis is a serious condition. We need to make sure your kidneys aren't damaged and that the new treatment plan is working consistently. I nodded, trying to look like a compliant patient. After talking to Garrison the previous evening, I felt hopeful that I could stand up to Edwin and Honora's plans. It gave me strength and determination to get well as soon as possible. Garrison said he was flying to Dallas in 3 days. I didn't tell my son about this, deciding to wait until my ex-husband arrived. I knew Edwin would be unhappy with my decision to seek help from his father, with whom he had always had a difficult relationship. The day passed quietly. Carol stopped by after work, bringing fresh flowers and the latest office gossip. Her sincere concern for my health warmed my heart. At least someone really cared about me, and not just my possessions. By evening, I felt well enough to get out of bed and walk around the ward a little. Nurse Bernice nodded approvingly when she saw me on my feet. That's good. Movement helps the blood circulate better. Just don't overdo it. I had just returned to bed when the phone rang. The screen lit up with Edwin's name. I sighed, bracing myself for another unpleasant conversation, and answered. Hi, Edwin. Mom! My son's voice sounded excited, almost jubilant. I have great news. Really? I asked cautiously, feeling every muscle in my body tense. I'm getting married tomorrow, he blurted out. Anora and I have decided to renew our wedding vows. It's our 5th anniversary, you know? Just a small ceremony with our closest friends. Congratulations, I replied, trying to sound sincere. That's unexpected. And that's not all, Edwin continued, oblivious to the tension in my voice. Your car and house are sold. My heart skipped a beat. Despite my conversation with Harrison, despite knowing about the trust, hearing my own son casually announce the sale of my property was painful. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound calm. We found a great buyer for your house, Edwin explained. A young family willing to pay even more than market value because they fell in love with the location and the architecture. And your Honda will be bought by one of Honor's colleagues. It's a bit old, of course, but he's a fan of that model. And when did you manage to arrange all this? My voice grew colder. Anora and I have been working on it for the last 2 days, Edwin replied with a hint of pride. Everything went even faster than we expected. I have power of attorney over your affairs, remember? You signed it last year when you thought you were going to have eye surgery. I vaguely remembered signing a document before a possible cataract operation, which in the end wasn't necessary. Edwin had insisted at the time that it was a standard precaution. I had no idea that the power of attorney was still valid. And you didn't think you should have discussed this with me first? I asked, feeling anger rising inside me. Well, you're in the hospital, Mom, he said, his voice taking on a condescending tone. You need to focus on getting better, not worrying about things like this. Besides, Anora and I have already found the perfect place for you at Golden Autumn. A private room with a view of the garden, 3 meals a day, and medical staff on call around the clock. And what about the money from the sale of the house? I asked bluntly. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. Most of it will go toward paying for your stay at Golden Autumn, of course, Edwin said. But there was something in his voice that made me wary. It's not cheap, you know, and we'll put the rest in an account to cover your medical expenses. I could almost physically feel him avoiding a direct answer. Is that all? I insisted. No other plans for the money? Well, Anora has been talking about opening a small bookshop, Edwin admitted reluctantly. But that's secondary, Mom. Your well-being is the most important thing. I closed my eyes, feeling anger give way to deep sadness. My son, my boy, who once ran to me with his joys and sorrows, was now controlling my life without the slightest regard for my wishes. So, Edwin summed up, taking my silence as agreement, Honora and I will pick you up when you're discharged and take you straight to Golden Autumn. They're already preparing your room, and your things from home. Well, the room there isn't very big, so we'll pick out the essentials and the rest. Sell them? I finished for him. Most of them, yes, he replied without a hint of embarrassment. But we'll keep the most valuable things, of course. Photo albums, for example, and maybe your grandmother's silver. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. This was the decisive moment. I could have made a scene, screamed, cried, accused my son of betrayal. But that would only have convinced him that I was unstable and incapable of making decisions. Instead, I decided to act calmly and deliberately. Okay, I said in an even voice, but you haven't taken one thing into account. What do you mean? There was a hint of concern in his voice. I chuckled softly, imagining the look on his face when he found out the truth. The house you sold never belonged entirely to me, Edwin. What do you mean? His voice was now clearly alarmed. The house is part of a family trust, I explained. Your grandfather created it to protect the family property. Under the terms of the trust, the house cannot be sold without the consent of all the beneficiaries. What other beneficiaries? Edwin's voice rose with tension. Your father, for example, I replied calmly. Garrison is still listed in the trust despite our divorce. Your grandfather respected him very much and insisted on it. And then there's my brother Frank and his children. But, Edwin was clearly stunned. Why didn't you ever tell me about this? You never asked, I replied simply. You were a teenager when the trust was set up, and you weren't very interested in legal details. And then when you grew up, the subject never came up. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see Edwin feverishly trying to digest this information and assess the implications. You're joking, right? He finally managed to say. This is some kind of trick to avoid moving into a nursing home, isn't it? Not at all, I replied. Check the house documents, Edwin. All the trust documents are in my home office, in the top right-hand drawer of the desk. It's a large blue folder labeled Hampshire Family Trust. But I've already signed a preliminary sales agreement. Panic crept into his voice. The buyers have put down a deposit. Well, you'll have to give them their money back, I shrugged, though he couldn't see me. Because any transaction without the consent of all the beneficiaries of the trust is invalid. And by the way, your father is flying into Dallas in a few days. My father? Edwin now sounded genuinely frightened. Did you contact him? Yes, I confirmed. Last night. He was very concerned when he found out that you were trying to dispose of my property without my consent. But I did it for your own good. You need care, medical supervision, Edwin exclaimed. Which I can get without giving up my home, I said firmly, and without letting you and Honor use the money from its sale to open a bookstore. So that's what this is about. His voice became cold. You've always been against Honore, against our plans. You just don't want us to be happy. The injustice hit harder than I expected. After all the years I had put his interests above my own, after all the sacrifices I had made for his well-being, he was accusing me of selfishness. I've always wanted only your happiness, Edwin, I said quietly. But not at the expense of my own well-being, and not in this way. Your father turned you against me, didn't he? He accused. He always knew how to manipulate you. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. Garrison has nothing to do with this, I replied. This is your own doing, Edwin. You decided to take control of my life and my property without my consent. You didn't even ask me what I wanted. Because you're a stubborn old woman who can't see past the end of her nose, he blurted out, and I could almost physically feel something break between us. You don't understand that Anora and I are doing this out of concern for you. That doesn't sound like caring, Edwin, my voice trembled. Not from weakness, but from suppressed emotions. Caring means respecting another person's wishes, even if you don't agree with them. Caring means asking, not deciding for someone else. You know what? Do whatever you want. Stay in your old house until it falls apart. Keep living in the past. But don't expect Anora and me to be there for you when your next crisis hits. I wasn't expecting that, I replied quietly. And by the way, congratulations on renewing your vows. Too bad you didn't think to invite me. We thought you'd be in the hospital, he muttered, no longer as confident as before. Sure, I nodded. Convenient excuse. After a brief and tense goodbye, I hung up and sat for a long time staring into space. Despite my victory, and it was a victory, I had kept my home and my independence, I felt a deep sadness. My son, my only child, the person I loved most in the world, had been capable of such betrayal. Perhaps I had been naive, failing to notice the signs of his selfishness before. Or maybe I just didn't want to see them, preferring to believe that somewhere deep down he was still the caring boy I had raised. But now the illusions were gone, and I saw the truth in all its ugliness. I picked up the phone and dialed Garrison's number. He answered almost immediately. Clarice? Is something wrong? Edwin just called, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He said he sold the house and my car and already booked me into a nursing home. Damn it! Garrison swore, which was rare for him. He can't do that. I told him about the trust, I continued, and that you were coming. He was not thrilled. I can imagine, Garrison snorted. What did he say? He accused me of being against his happiness, I said bitterly, and that I'm a stubborn old woman who can't see past her own nose. That's not true, and you know it, Garrison said firmly. You've always been the most selfless mother I've ever known. You put his interests above your career, your personal life, everything. His words, so unexpectedly warm and understanding, brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Don't let his ingratitude make you doubt yourself, Garrison advised. You did everything you could and more. If he doesn't appreciate it, that's his problem, not yours. We talked a little longer. Garrison told me his flight was arriving in Dallas in 2 days, and he would come straight to the hospital. I offered to have Carol pick him up at the airport, but he declined, saying he would take a taxi. After our conversation, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, I had a feeling that everything would be okay, despite the rift with my son. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new phase in my life, a phase where I would finally live for myself and not for others. I looked out the window at Dallas at night, at the lights of the skyscrapers twinkling in the darkness, and thought about my home. The home where I grew up, where I raised my son, a home full of memories, both good and bad. I wasn't ready to leave it, especially not the way Edwin had planned. The family trust was my father's idea, a practical man who always thought several steps ahead. He created it after his friend lost his family home due to the machinations of an unscrupulous son-in-law. Clarice, he told me then, never trust anyone, not even those closest to you when it comes to inheritance. People change when money is involved. I never thought those words would prove prophetic when it came to my own son, but here we are. Under the terms of the trust, the house could not be sold without the consent of all beneficiaries, including Harrison, my brother Frank, his children, and even Edwin himself, who seemed to have forgotten that he was also part of this legal mechanism. I wonder what my father would have said if he had seen his grandson trying to circumvent the protection he had created. He probably wouldn't have been surprised. He was always a realist when it came to human nature. My thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. The screen lit up with Anora's name. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Good evening, Anora, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Clarissa, she said, her tone cold and businesslike. Edwin told me about your conversation and the so-called family trust. Not so-called, but very real, I corrected her. Regardless of its status, she continued, your behavior is extremely selfish. Edwin and I are trying to ensure you have a comfortable retirement, and you are resisting out of some stubborn desire to prove your independence. I took a deep breath, trying not to give in to anger. Anora, I appreciate your concern, I began, although it wasn't true. But I will make my own decisions about my life, and I don't want to move into a nursing home, no matter how wonderful the conditions are there. You don't understand the consequences of your decision, she said, her voice betraying her irritation. What if you have another crisis? What if next time there's no one around to call an ambulance? That's a risk I'm willing to take, I replied firmly. Like millions of other elderly people who prefer to stay in their own homes. And you're willing to ruin your relationship with your son over this? Her voice became accusatory. Edwin is very upset. He feels that you don't trust him, that you chose your ex-husband over your own son. I didn't choose between them, I objected. I'm simply defending my right to decide how I want to live. And if Edwin really cared about my wishes, and not just what's convenient for the two of you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. A tense silence fell on the other end of the line. You know, Clarice, Anora finally said, her voice tinged with barely contained anger. I always told Edwin that you were manipulating him. You're using his guilt over the divorce to control his life. And here's the proof. You chose to contact his father, the man who abandoned you both, instead of trusting your own son. That's not true, I said quietly, feeling her words hit me where it hurt the most. I never used Edwin, and Garrison didn't abandon us. We separated by mutual consent, and he's always kept in touch with his son. Of course, defend him, Anora sneered. In any case, Edwin and I are washing our hands of this. Deal with your problems yourselves, but don't expect any help from us when things get worse. She hung up before I could respond. I slowly lowered the phone, feeling a strange mixture of anger, pain, and oddly enough, relief. At least now all the cards were on the table. No more pretense, no more fake smiles and insincere hugs. I knew there were many challenges ahead. My health was indeed at risk, and living alone with diabetes at my age was risky. But I also knew that I wasn't ready to give up my independence, my home, the life I had built. As for Edwin and Honora, well, maybe someday my son will understand that I wasn't trying to control his life or interfere with his happiness. I just wanted respect and a say in decisions that affected my own destiny. And if he never understands that, maybe I'll just have to accept it as another loss in a life full of losses and gains. I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling exhausted from all the emotional turmoil. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow I would be stronger. For now, I allowed myself to drift off into a dream where there was no betrayal, no pain, no disappointment, only peace. The day of my discharge came a week after I was admitted to the hospital. Dr. Coleman was pleased with my progress, though he didn't hide his concern. Your readings have improved significantly, Mrs. Hampshire, but diabetes is a chronic condition that requires constant monitoring, he said, looking over my chart. You'll need to be even more careful about your diet. Check your blood sugar regularly and strictly follow your new medication schedule. I nodded, listening carefully to his instructions. Over the past week, I had thought a lot and decided to take my health more seriously. Not for Edwin or his plans for my house, but for myself. Will someone be meeting you at the hospital? Dr. Coleman asked, ending our conversation. Yes, I replied. My ex-husband is coming. The doctor raised his eyebrows slightly but said nothing. He was probably used to his patients' complicated family situations. All right, I'll write you all the necessary prescriptions and recommendations. And, Mrs. Hampshire, he looked at me with sincere concern. Please don't neglect your health. At your age, diabetes can quickly lead to serious complications. I understand, doctor, I nodded. And thank you for your concern. After he left, I began gathering my things. A week in the hospital had accumulated quite a lot. The pajamas Carol had brought, books, toiletries, my phone, and charger. As I packed them into a bag, I thought about my upcoming meeting with Harrison. We hadn't seen each other in almost 15 years, since Edwin married Honor. Garrison had flown in for the wedding. We had exchanged a few polite words at the reception, and he had flown back to Arizona the next day. Since then, our communication had been limited to occasional phone calls and even more occasional emails. I knew that he had divorced his second wife a few years ago and was successfully developing his business manufacturing specialized equipment for solar power stations. I wonder if he has changed in appearance. The last time I saw him, his dark hair was just beginning to gray at the temples, and the first wrinkles were appearing at the corners of his eyes. He must be 69 now, 2 years older than me. Time had surely left its mark on him, just as it had on me. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. I expected to see the nurse with the latest instructions, but instead, Garrison was standing in the doorway. The first thing I noticed was that his once dark hair was now completely gray, but it was still thick and neatly trimmed. The wrinkles on his face had deepened, especially around his eyes and mouth, but this gave him the appearance of a man wise with experience rather than an old man. He was still fit and trim, dressed in simple but high-quality jeans and a blue shirt. "Clarice," he said with a slight smile, and I recognized his voice, though it had deepened a little with age. "Garrison," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of awkwardness and joy. "You're early. I thought you'd be coming closer to lunchtime." "My flight arrived earlier than expected," he explained, stepping into the ward. "I hope you don't mind." "Of course not." I shook my head. "I'm almost ready. Dr. Coleman has already signed my discharge papers." Garrison nodded and looked around, as if unsure what to do next. This uncertainty, so uncharacteristic of him, made me smile. It seemed I wasn't the only one who felt awkward about this meeting after so many years. "How are you feeling?" he finally asked. "Better," I replied. "The doctors say the crisis has passed, but I need to be more attentive to my health." "You've always been too careless in that regard," Garrison remarked, and there was a hint of old, familiar criticism in his voice. "Remember how you tried to hide your tonsillitis from me because you didn't want to cancel our trip to the lake? And in the end, we didn't go anywhere because I passed out in the car," I finished, recalling that long-ago episode. "Yes, I remember." "You were furious." "Not furious, terrified," he corrected. "I thought you were having a heart attack." We both fell silent, lost in our memories. It was strange how easily we slipped back into our old way of communicating, as if 15 years apart had never mattered. "I took a taxi," Garrison said, breaking the silence. "It's waiting downstairs. Are you ready?" "Yes," I nodded, zipping up my bag. "I just need to wait for the nurse with the final instructions and prescriptions." Right on cue, Bernice entered the room with a folder of documents. "Here are your prescriptions and dietary recommendations, Mrs. Hampshire," she said, handing me the papers. "And don't forget your follow-up appointment in 2 weeks." "Thank you, Bernice," I smiled, "for everything." The nurse nodded and turned to Garrison. "Are you Mrs. Hampshire's husband?" "Ex," he corrected, "but I'll be taking her home." "All right," Bernice nodded. "Make sure she doesn't overexert herself for the first few days and sticks to her diet. No sugar, minimal salt, more fresh vegetables, and lean protein." "I'll make sure." Garrison nodded seriously, and I felt a slight irritation at how they were discussing me as if I were a child. Finally, all the formalities were completed, and the orderly brought a wheelchair to take me to the exit. Standard procedure for all patients being discharged. I felt strong enough to walk on my own, but rules are rules. Garrison carried my bag and walked beside the wheelchair, staring silently ahead. I studied his profile, noting the changes that had taken place over the years. His wrinkles had deepened, his features had become slightly sharper, but overall he was still the same Garrison I had once loved. A taxi was waiting for us outside the hospital. Garrison helped me get in, then sat down next to me and gave the driver my address. "You remember?" I asked, surprised. "Of course," he shrugged. "I lived in that house for 15 years, Clarice. Some things you never forget." The ride was relatively quiet. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of Dallas, enjoying the view of the city after a week spent in a hospital room. Garrison periodically responded to messages on his phone, probably business matters. When the taxi stopped in front of my house, I felt a strange excitement. It was as if I was returning not just from the hospital, but from a long journey. And in a sense, that was true. My life had changed dramatically over the past week. Garrison paid the driver and helped me out of the car. We slowly climbed the steps to the porch. I took my keys out of my purse, but before I could put them in the lock, the door swung open. Edwin stood in the doorway, his face a mixture of surprise and irritation. "Mom?" He looked from me to Garrison. "Dad?" "Hello, Edwin," Garrison said calmly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I live here," my son replied coldly, and I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Since when?" I asked. "Since you went to the hospital." Edwin explained, stepping back so we could enter. Someone had to look after the house. I entered the hallway and immediately noticed the changes. There were boxes in the corner. Anora's coat and Edwin's jacket were hanging on the coat rack, and their keys and mail were on the table. "Did you move in?" I asked bluntly. "Temporarily," Edwin replied, avoiding my gaze. "We thought you might need some help after you got out of the hospital." Anora came out of the living room and her face changed when she saw Garrison. "Oh," she said with feigned surprise. "What a surprise." "Hello, Anora," Garrison nodded. "It's nice to see you again." I could have sworn she was momentarily taken aback, not knowing how to react. Then her face took on an expression of polite interest. "Are you here to visit Clarissa? How kind of you." "I've come to help Clarissa sort out some issues," Garrison replied calmly. "In particular, the situation surrounding the house." Anora's face froze and Edwin visibly tensed. "Let's go into the living room," I suggested, feeling the tension mounting. "I need to sit down." The living room had changed too. My old sofa cushions had been replaced with new ones in bright colors, and there were modern paintings on the walls that I had never seen before. On the coffee table were catalogs of designer furniture and wallpaper samples. "Are you redecorating?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just freshening things up a bit," Anora replied with feigned nonchalance. "This room could use an update." I slowly sank into my favorite armchair, the only piece of furniture that seemed to have escaped their renovations. Garrison sat down on the sofa opposite me, while Edwin and Anora remained standing, as if hesitating to join us. "So," Garrison began, shifting his gaze from Edwin to Anora, "Clarissa told me you're planning to sell this house." "That's none of your business," Edwin replied sharply. "You haven't been part of this family for a long time." "Perhaps," Garrison agreed. "But I am still the beneficiary of the family trust that owns this house, and as such, I have a say in any decisions regarding its sale." Edwin shot me an accusing look. "You really got him involved in this? After everything he did to us?" "He didn't do anything to us, Edwin," I said wearily. "Your father and I separated by mutual consent. It was a mature decision between two adults." "He abandoned us," Edwin exclaimed, his voice filled with the lingering resentment of a 12-year-old boy. "No," Garrison said firmly. "I didn't abandon you, Edwin. I moved to another city, but I've always been your father. I called you every week, came to all your important events, paid for your education." "That wasn't enough," Edwin said bitterly. "You weren't there when I really needed you." "Perhaps," Garrison nodded. "And if so, I'm sorry. But this isn't about the past, it's about the present, about trying to sell your mother's house without her consent." "We did it for her own good," Anora interjected. "Clarice needs constant care, which we can't provide. A nursing home is the best solution." "And that's why you've already moved here and started remodeling?" Garrison asked, glancing around the changed living room. "Are you preparing the house for sale or to live here yourselves?" Anora blushed and Edwin clenched his fists. "We just wanted to make the house look more modern," she said. "It would increase its value if we sold it. And of course, some of the money from the sale would go toward opening your bookstore," Garrison added. "What a convenient coincidence." "Who told you that?" Anora shot me an indignant look. "Edwin," I replied calmly, "during our phone conversation." "It was just an option," Edwin said, embarrassed, "not the main goal. But important enough to mention it to a mother who just suffered a serious diabetic crisis," Garrison remarked. Edwin and Anora exchanged quick glances, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "Listen," Edwin said, changing tactics. "We're all tired and upset. Let's put this conversation on hold. Mom just got out of the hospital and needs some rest." "Good idea," I agreed. "But first, I'd like to clarify a few things. First, I'm not moving into a nursing home. Second, this house is not for sale. And third, I would appreciate it if you would restore my living room to its former state and remove your belongings from the hallway." "Are you kicking us out?" Edwin asked incredulously. "No," I shook my head. "I just want you to respect my decisions and my space. You're always welcome to visit, but living here, no, that's not an option." "And who will take care of you?" Anora asked with feigned concern. Doctor, Coleman said, you need constant supervision. I'll be in Dallas for 2 weeks, Garrison interjected. And I'll help Clarissa during that time. Then we'll find another solution. Maybe a nurse who will come several times a week. And you think you can do better than us? Anora exclaimed indignantly. You, who haven't seen her in 15 years. Maybe not better, Garrison replied calmly. But at least I'm not trying to sell her house and use the money for my own purposes. Edwin turned pale with anger. You have no right to speak that way about our motives. You know nothing about our life, about our difficulties. I know enough, Garrison said firmly. And I know that the family trust set up by Clarissa's father exists precisely to prevent situations like this. The house cannot be sold without the consent of all the beneficiaries, including me and Uncle Frank. That old trust, Anora snorted contemptuously. We consulted a lawyer. He said there are ways to get around those outdated restrictions. Really? Garrison raised an eyebrow. I wonder what Judge Ramirez, who helped draft this trust and is still its trustee, would say to that. Honora's face fell, and Edwin swallowed nervously. You're bluffing, she said uncertainly. Not at all. Garrison shook his head. I spoke with Judge Ramirez yesterday. He sends his regards, by the way. And he said he'd be happy to meet with you if you have any questions about the trust. A heavy silence fell. I watched my son and daughter-in-law's faces, seeing their confidence gradually give way to uncertainty and then outright alarm. This isn't fair, Edwin finally said. You've ganged up on us. No, dear, I replied gently. We're just protecting my interests and my right to make my own decisions about my life. What you were planning to do is unfair. We wanted what was best, Edwin repeated stubbornly, but the confidence had drained from his voice. Perhaps, Garrison nodded. But you didn't ask Clarice what she wanted. You decided for her. Because she's stubborn and can't see what's best for her, Anora exclaimed. Or maybe she just has her own opinion, which differs from yours, Garrison remarked calmly. And as an adult, she has a right to that opinion. Edwin and Anora exchanged glances again, clearly unsure of what to do next. Their plan was falling apart before their eyes, and they weren't prepared for this turn of events. All right, Edwin finally said. If you insist, we won't sell the house, but I still believe that Mom needs constant care and a nursing home is the best option. I appreciate your concern, Edwin, I said, trying to keep my voice soft. But the decision is mine, and I choose to stay in my house. What about the money? Anora asked suddenly. We've already put down a deposit for a place at Golden Autumn. It's a lot of money. Which you'll lose because you acted without Clarice's consent, Garrison said firmly. That's not fair, Anora exclaimed indignantly. We spent time and money thinking about what was best for Clarissa, and now we have to pay for it? You could have avoided these expenses if you had simply asked me what I wanted, I remarked, instead of deciding for me. Edwin looked dejected. He sank down on the sofa and covered his face with his hands. What about the bookshop? He asked hollowly. We were counting on the money from selling the house. Perhaps you should consider a business loan, Garrison suggested. Or find investors. There are many legitimate ways to start a business without selling your mother's house. Anora sat down next to her husband, her face a mixture of disappointment and anger. I always knew you'd choose him over us, she said bitterly. You never approved of our marriage, never accepted me. That's not true, Anora. I shook my head. I've always wanted Edwin to be happy, and if you make him happy, I'm glad. But that doesn't mean I have to let you run my life. We just wanted to help, Edwin repeated, looking up at me. You can't manage on your own, Mom. This crisis has proven that. I admit I need help, I nodded. But not in the form of a nursing home. We'll find another solution. What? Anora asked skeptically. You're going to live here alone and risk another crisis? Or maybe your ex-husband will move in with you. She shot a mocking glance at Garrison. We haven't decided yet, Garrison replied calmly. But we have time to consider all the options. Sure, Anora snorted. It's the two of you against us, as always. No one is against you, I said wearily. We just want you to respect my decisions. Decisions that could cost you your life, Edwin said grimly. That's my risk, I replied firmly. And my choice. Garrison got up from the sofa. I think that's enough for today. Clarice needs some rest. We can continue this conversation tomorrow when everyone has calmed down a bit. There will be no tomorrow, Anora said sharply, also standing up. We're leaving, today, and don't expect us to be frequent guests in this house. Anora, Edwin began, but she cut him off. No, Edwin, I'm not going to sit here and listen to them accuse us of selfish motives when all we wanted to do was help. Pack your things, we're leaving. Edwin looked torn between his wife and his parents. For a moment, an expression of uncertainty, almost boyish confusion, flashed across his face. But then it was replaced by determination. Anora is right, he said, standing up. We've done everything we can. If you prefer to risk your health, Mother, that's your choice. But don't expect us to be there when things go wrong. I never expected anything from you but respect for my decisions, I replied quietly. And I'm sorry that even that proved too much. Edwin and Anora left the living room, and soon we could hear them gathering their things in the hallway. Garrison looked at me silently, his face a mixture of sympathy and admiration. You've always been strong, Clarice, he said quietly. But today you surpassed yourself. I don't feel strong, I admitted. More like empty. That's normal, he nodded. Confronting loved ones is always exhausting, but you did what had to be done. Spring sunshine flooded the spacious room that had once been a guest bedroom and was now an art studio. I stood in front of the easel, concentrating on applying strokes of acrylic paint to the canvas. A landscape gradually emerged on the painting, the old elm trees on my street, illuminated by the setting sun. It wasn't a masterpiece, of course, but for someone who had picked up a paintbrush just 6 months ago, it was quite a decent effort. Time flew by unnoticed as I painted. Sometimes I even forgot about lunch, completely immersed in the creative process. Only the sound of the timer reminding me to check my blood sugar brought me back to reality. 6 months had passed since the day Edwin and Anora left my house, slamming the door loudly and promising never to return. 6 months that changed my life more than the previous 10 years. After they left, Garrison stayed with me for 2 weeks, as he had promised. We gradually got to know each other again, overcoming the initial awkwardness and finding common ground. He helped me with shopping, drove me to doctor's appointments, and made sure I took my medication on time. In the evenings, we sat in the living room and talked about the past, about life after divorce, about our mistakes and regrets. I never thought we'd be sitting here together like this again, he said one evening as we drank herbal tea in front of the fireplace. Life is full of surprises, isn't it? Yes, I agreed, although I would have preferred this particular surprise under different circumstances. Garrison nodded understandingly. Has Edwin called yet? I shook my head. Number, and I'm not sure I want him to. After everything that's happened, I don't know if we can ever go back to a normal relationship. Give him time, Garrison advised. He's stubborn. He gets that from both of us. But eventually he'll realize he was wrong. I wasn't so sure about that, but I kept my thoughts to myself. The wound from my son's betrayal was still too fresh for me to think about reconciliation. Before he left, Garrison helped me hire a nurse who came 3 times a week to check on me and help with cleaning. He also insisted on installing an emergency call system, a bracelet with a button that I had to wear at all times. In case of an emergency, one press would automatically call an ambulance and send a notification to my contacts, Garrison and Carol. I don't want to seem intrusive, he said, showing me how the bracelet worked. But it will give us both peace of mind. I agreed, understanding his concern. My health did require constant monitoring, and this small precaution was a reasonable measure. After Harrison left for Arizona, I thought our communication would once again be reduced to occasional phone calls. But instead, he called almost every day, just to see how I was doing. And then, a month later, he showed up again, this time on business. We're expanding into Texas, he explained. We're opening an office in Dallas. I'll be coming here regularly over the next few months. His visits became an integral part of my new life. Every 2 or 3 weeks, Garrison would spend a few days in Dallas. He stayed at a hotel, but spent most of his free time at my house. We went to restaurants, visited exhibitions, walked in the park, simple things I had long since stopped doing, locked in a routine of work and loneliness. It was Garrison who pushed me to finally fulfill a long-held dream of taking up painting. You always said you wanted to paint when you retired, he reminded me during one of his visits. Why not start now? At my age? I laughed. A little late for new beginnings, don't you think? Grandma Moses started painting at 78, he replied. You're only 67. You have plenty of time to become a famous artist. And so an art studio appeared in my house. Garrison helped move the furniture from the guest bedroom to the storage room, and then we went to an art supply store together, where he insisted on buying high-quality materials. If you're going to do it right, he said, putting canvases, brushes, paints, and an easel into the basket. At first, I felt ridiculous standing in front of a blank canvas with a brush in my hand. My first attempts were terrible. Crooked lines, incorrect proportions, faded colors. But gradually, thanks to online lessons and books on painting techniques, I began to make progress. Painting became my passion, my way of expressing the feelings and emotions that I had suppressed for so long. At the end of autumn, I even decided to sign up for painting classes at a local community center. There, I met a group of other beginner artists, mostly people my age looking for new hobbies in retirement. We quickly became friends, and soon I was going with them to exhibitions, cafes, and even plein air painting sessions in city parks. My life, which until recently had revolved around work and rare visits from my son, was suddenly filled with new people, events, and interests. I felt more alive than I had in the last 20 years. Of course, there were difficulties. My health required constant attention. I had 2 minor crises when my blood sugar rose dangerously high. But thanks to my emergency bracelet, help arrived quickly, and I was able to avoid serious consequences. In December, Garrison surprised me by announcing that he was moving to Dallas for good. The office is doing well, he explained, and I need to be here to oversee the process. Besides, he hesitated. I enjoy spending time with you, Clarice, more than I expected. I didn't know how to respond. Our relationship had become warm and friendly over the past few months, but the thought of anything more had never crossed my mind. We had been married for 15 years and divorced 20 years ago. Romantic interests seemed absurd at our age and after everything that had happened between us. Don't look at me like that, Garrison laughed, seeing my confusion. I'm not proposing. I'm just saying that I enjoy your company, and if you don't mind, I'd like to continue seeing you regularly. I enjoy your company too, I replied honestly, and I'd love to see you more often. So Garrison became a regular part of my life. He bought a small house 15 minutes away from me and often stopped by after work. We cooked dinner together, watched old movies, discussed books and the news. Sometimes he stayed overnight in the guest room, especially if we stayed up late. My friends from the art club were thrilled with our story. Reunited after all these years, exclaimed Doris, a romantic 72-year-old widow. It's like in the movies. We're just friends, I corrected her every time. Former spouses who have learned to appreciate each other's company. But secretly, I caught myself thinking that our relationship was indeed taking on a tone of something more than just friendship. I noticed how Garrison sometimes looked at me when he thought I wasn't looking. How his hand lingered on my shoulder a little longer than necessary. How he always found a reason to touch me, to fix a strand of hair, brush an invisible speck of dust off my clothes. And what's more surprising, I found that I liked it. At 67, after 20 years of loneliness, I suddenly felt like a desirable woman. It was strange, a little scary, and incredibly exciting. In early spring, almost 6 months after I was discharged from the hospital, something happened that I had both been waiting for and dreading. I ran into Edwin. It happened at a large shopping mall in downtown Dallas. I went to an art supply store to buy some new paintbrushes and decided to have a cup of coffee at the cafe across the street. And there, at a table by the window, sat my son. Alone, without honor, with a cup of coffee and a laptop. My first instinct was to leave without being noticed. But then our eyes met, and I saw his eyes widen in surprise. It was too late to hide. Edwin got up from his seat and walked uncertainly toward me. "Mom," he said, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "You look good." And I did look good. I had lost weight over the past few months thanks to dieting and regular walks. My hair, which I used to just pull back in a bun, was now neatly trimmed into a modern shortcut. And I had stopped wearing shapeless pants and blouses, replacing them with more stylish clothes that Doris, a former style consultant in my past life, had helped me choose. Thank you, I replied modestly. You look good too. That was a lie. Edwin looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, he had lost weight, and his usually neat clothes looked rumpled. Can I buy you a coffee? He asked. If you have time, of course. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to say I was busy and leave. But another part, the maternal part, was concerned about how tired he looked. Okay, I agreed. I have a little time. We sat down at his table. Edwin ordered tea for me. He remembered that coffee wasn't recommended for my diabetes. How's your health? He asked after an awkward pause. Stable, I replied. There have been a couple of minor crises, but nothing serious. I'm following my doctor's orders strictly. That's good, he nodded. Onora and I think about you a lot. We're worried. Really? I couldn't hide the skepticism in my voice. In 6 months, not a single phone call, not a single message. That's a strange way to express concern. Edwin looked down, clearly embarrassed. I know, I should have called. But after everything that happened, I didn't know if you'd want to talk to me. You could have tried, I said. Yes, he agreed. It's my fault. We fell silent again. I studied my son's face, trying to see the little boy I had loved so much. But all I saw was a tired middle-aged man burdened by some kind of problem. How are you in honor? I finally asked. You looked so happy in the photos from your vow renewal. We're going through a difficult period, Edwin admitted reluctantly. The bookstore that Anora dreamed of. We finally opened it. We took out a bank loan and invested all our savings. But things aren't going very well. The competition is fierce, and the expenses are enormous. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. And I really was sorry. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want my son to fail. We're thinking about selling, Edwin continued. But that means admitting defeat and losing most of the money we invested. I nodded, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort him, offer help. But another, more cynical part wondered if that was why he had brought up the subject. How are you managing on your own? Edwin asked, changing the subject. It's still a big house for one person. I'm not alone, I replied. I have a nurse who comes 3 times a week, and your father stops by often. Edwin's face changed at the mention of Harrison. Is he still in Dallas? I thought he was coming back to Arizona after everything. He moved here permanently, I said. His company opened an office in Dallas. He bought a house not far from me. You two? Edwin faltered, not knowing how to phrase the question. We're friends, I replied simply. Good friends. Edwin nodded, but I could see from his expression that he didn't quite believe in simple friendship. I'm glad you're not alone, he said finally. It's reassuring. There was another pause. I finished my tea, wondering if it was time to end this awkward encounter. But Edwin seemed to be gathering his courage for something important. Mom, he began, his voice tense. I wanted to apologize for how Anora and I treated you. It was wrong to try to sell your house, to make decisions for you. I see that now. I looked at him closely, trying to determine if his remorse was genuine or if this was just a way to lead into a request for help. Thank you for apologizing, I said, holding back my emotions. I appreciate it. And I was hoping, he took a deep breath, that we could start over, rebuild our relationship. I miss you, Mom. Here it was, the moment I'd been thinking about all these months. How would I react if Edwin offered reconciliation? Would I forgive him? Would I be able to forget how he and Honor had planned to control my life without my consent? How they had spoken about me behind my back, considering me a burden, a stubborn old woman. And now, looking into his tired, almost pleading eyes, I realized that I was not ready to simply forget everything and return to our previous relationship. Edwin, I began cautiously, I miss you too. The man I raised, the man I loved unconditionally. But what happened? It wasn't just a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was betrayal. You and Anora planned to sell my house, send me to an institution I would hate, and use the money for your business. And all under the guise of caring for me. We did care, Edwin objected. Yes, maybe we went too far, but initially we only wanted the best for you. The best according to your standards, I shook my head. Not mine. You never even asked me what I wanted. Edwin looked down, unable to find any arguments. And now that your business is in trouble, you suddenly remember me, I continued, feeling the bitterness rising inside me. This coincidence seems too convenient to me. No, it's not, Edwin exclaimed. I really miss you, Mom, and yes, we have problems with the business, but that's not why I want to make up. I sighed, suddenly feeling tired from this conversation. Maybe that's true, Edwin. But trust is a fragile thing. Once it's broken, it's not so easy to rebuild. I need time. And to be honest, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to trust you completely again. His face reflected the pain of my words, and for a moment I felt a pang of regret. But then I remembered how he and Anora had discussed selling my house in the hospital corridor, unaware that I could hear every word. How they had planned my life without considering my wishes, and my resolve grew stronger. I understand, Edwin said quietly, but I hope that one day you'll be able to forgive me. We're family, after all. Families don't do that to each other, I replied. Families respect each other's choices, even if they don't agree with them. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I have to go. It was interesting to see you, Edwin. I'm glad you're okay. Can I at least call you sometimes? He asked, also standing up, just to see how you are. I hesitated, then nodded. You can call, but I can't promise I'll always answer. And Edwin, don't expect any financial help from me. I'm not going to save your business. That's your choice, your responsibility. He flinched as if I had hit him, and I realized I had hit the nail on the head. Financial help was, if not the main reason, then at least one of the reasons he wanted to reconnect. I understand, he said in a strained voice. Goodbye, Mom. Take care of yourself. You take care of yourself, Edwin, I replied, and for the first time in the entire conversation, I allowed my motherly love to show in my voice. I sincerely hope that you and Anora find a way out of this situation. I left the cafe with a heavy heart, but also with the feeling that I had made the right decision. Perhaps someday I would be able to forgive my son completely. But right now, it was more important to protect myself, my independence, and my dignity. When I got home, I found Garrison in my studio. He was looking at my latest work, a portrait of Doris that I had been working on for the past 2 weeks. It's getting better. He nodded approvingly when he heard my footsteps. You've captured her smile perfectly, that mischievous sparkle in her eyes. He turned and froze when he saw the look on my face. What's wrong? He asked, immediately coming closer. Are you okay? Are you feeling sick? I ran into Edwin, I said simply. At the mall. Garrison helped me into a chair in the corner of the studio and sat down opposite me. How did it go? I told him about our conversation, leaving out no details. Garrison listened attentively, not interrupting, only frowning or nodding occasionally. Do you think I did the right thing? I asked when I finished. By refusing to reconcile immediately? I think you did the right thing, he replied. Edwin needs to understand that actions have consequences, and if he really wants to repair the relationship, he'll be willing to work at it, rather than expecting you to just forget everything. I nodded, feeling relieved by his support. You know what's strange? I said after a pause. I feel guilty for not forgiving him right away. Like I'm a bad mother if I'm not ready to take him back with open arms. That doesn't make you a bad mother, Garrison said firmly. It makes you a person who respects yourself enough not to let others, even those close to you, hurt you. And that's a lesson that Edwin can learn from too. I smiled, grateful for his understanding. Thank you, I said quietly. For everything, for coming when I called, for staying, for supporting me even when I doubt myself. Garrison took my hand in his fingers gently squeezing mine. You're welcome, he replied simply. You know, I often think about how strange everything turned out. 20 years apart and suddenly we're back in each other's lives. It's like someone gave us a second chance. I looked at our intertwined hands, feeling warmth spread through me. A second chance, I repeated. Do you believe in things like that? Not before, he smiled. But the last 6 months have made me rethink a lot of my beliefs. We sat in silence, watching the sun set outside the window. Its rays bathed the room in golden hues, creating an atmosphere of peace and tranquility. At that moment, I suddenly realized how much my life had changed in those 6 months. From a woman who existed in a routine of work and loneliness, I had become someone who had discovered new hobbies, made new friends, and perhaps found new love.